That night, Lise Coleman needed a babysitter to look after her 10-month-old son, Travis. Christine Falling, who had experience in babysitting, offered to take care of the baby at her house. The next morning, the little boy was found dead without any evidence of aggression or violence. However, the police investigation revealed a much darker truth than anyone could have imagined. On March 12, 1963, Christine Falling was born in Perry, USA. She was the second daughter of a couple who would be considered very unusual today. Her mother, Anne, was a minor, only 16 years old when she had Christine. The eldest daughter, Carol, was born more than a year earlier when Anne was just 14 or 15 years old. To this already dramatic picture was added the significant age difference with Thomas, her father, who was 65 years old. Throughout history, there have been a few uncommon relationships where a large age difference does not matter, and the marriage is very happy. However, this was not the case with Anne and Thomas. A few months after Christine was born, her mother left the house, leaving her and her sister Carol in the care of their father, who worked as a lumberjack and had little to no parenting skills. However, the young mother did not run away forever. She returned home sometime later and was pregnant again. She had more kids over the next 2 years, naming them Michael and Earl. Although the home had 2 girls and 2 boys, Thomas, the husband, claimed that only one of the 4 children was his. It was evident that the family's conditions were neither normal nor stable. The arguments between the mismatched couple grew increasingly frequent, sometimes turning violent. During periods when Anne disappeared, Thomas would take the 4 children to the forest while he worked. The situation was dire for everyone, especially the children. Adding to their difficulties, Thomas suffered a work-related accident that rendered him unable to continue working. One day, Anne made an extreme decision. She took her 4 children, put them in the car, drove to a shopping center, sat them on a bench and left, never to return. It is not difficult to imagine that the 4 children ended up in the social care system, circulating through orphanages and related institutions. No further information is found about the 2 younger brothers, Michael and Earl. The eldest daughter, Carol, seemed to be a normal child, or at least no contrary references are found. But Christine was a different story. Living in adverse conditions since birth, Christine developed mental problems, intellectual deficits, and exhibited aggressive behavior. Caregivers at the orphanage described her as a compulsive liar and thief, someone who broke rules to get attention. Her relationships with other children and people in general were terrible. Everything became more complicated when she began to gain weight uncontrollably and suffer from epilepsy. It is easy to imagine that in an orphanage environment, Christine endured more suffering, becoming the target of mockery, comments, and cruel treatment. However, sometime later, both Christine and Carol had a stroke of luck. They were adopted by a couple, the Fallings, who not only gave them their last name, but also a stable home. The Fallings were a couple who longed to have children, but Dolly Falling couldn't get pregnant. Some accounts suggest that the husband knew the girl's family, which is why they decided to adopt both of them. Unfortunately, although their environment changed, Christine's behavior did not. She was problematic. Her vocabulary and way of speaking were not consistent with her age. She had fits of rage, and she continued a habit she had started in the orphanage, tormenting cats in unimaginable ways. Sometimes she would throw them from great heights to see if it was true that they had 9 lives. She quickly discovered it was false, but continued her experiments. Another factor that added tension to the situation was Christine's epilepsy. Life in the Falling household began to turn into a nightmare, not just for the seemingly generous couple, but especially for the adopted girls. According to some sources, the father abused both girls, particularly the older one. This was something the couple always denied, though there are records of 2 arrests of the father for abusing Carol. The first case went to trial, but the jury was divided. The second time, the accusation was made by his own wife, Dolly, who later withdrew it. Things were so out of control that the pastor of their church intervened and managed to convince the family to remove the girls from their home. Thus, the sisters were sent to a home in Orlando, where a large group of children, aged between 6 and 21, lived after being removed from their homes due to abuse, neglect, or abandonment. Apparently, This place was more pleasant for Christine, but it did not stop her impulsive, deceitful, aggressive, and cruel behavior, nor her epileptic seizures. After some time, frustrated by their inability to achieve the desired behavior from the sisters, particularly Christine, the authorities decided to remove both girls from the institution. Consequently, they were sent back to the Fallings. From this point on, the intimate abuse seemingly stopped, but the physical violence did not. The final straw was a severe beating the father gave Christine for being 10 minutes late coming home. To make matters worse, the next day, he insisted that she go to school in shorts so everyone could see the marks of his justice. She was not only mistreated, but also humiliated. Carol, the eldest, who was approaching 15 years old, decided to find a job to establish her independence. Christine, just over 12 years old, supported her. The day after the beating, both girls ran away from the Falling home. With their newfound independence, their world changed, and not for the better. Initially, both sisters went to a friend's house of Carol's. Christine stayed there for a month and a half, but then decided to look for her biological mother in northern Florida. She managed to find her and lived with her for a while. Nearly 2 years later, in 1977, at the age of 14, Christine fell in love with a 20-year-old young man whose name I couldn't confirm, but it was said he was her stepbrother. Shortly after, they got married, but the sudden marriage lasted only 6 weeks, marked by arguments and violent fights. Christine ended up in the hospital twice for injuries sustained during these fights. In one incident, she even threw a heavy outdoor object weighing over 20 pounds at her husband while he slept. The hasty marriage ended even more abruptly. Following this new disaster in her life, Christine, who by then weighed around 200 pounds, began to exhibit new behavior. Over the next 2 years, she visited the emergency room more than 50 times with a long series of strange and varied ailments that doctors couldn't diagnose. She always seemed very nervous, listing symptoms that didn't correspond to any known diseases. In other instances, potential diagnoses were ruled out with medical tests. One time, Christine went to the emergency room claiming a servant had bitten her, but this was proven false. On another occasion, she arrived at the hospital with bleeding from her intimate areas, which turned out to be just her menstruation. Eventually, the doctors reached a possible diagnosis in her case: Munchausen syndrome, a mental disorder in which a person pretends to be ill, creates symptoms, and even inflicts injuries on themselves to attract medical attention and, consequently, the interest of others due to their supposed poor health. Despite all her strange behaviors, significant weight, obvious mental problems, lack of social skills, and unkempt appearance, Christine had a reputation for loving children and being responsible and trustworthy. This led her to earn some money by babysitting for friends and neighbors. First, everything seemed fine. Her services were appreciated, and as a result, her occasional jobs became more frequent. Things seemed to be finally going well for her. Then came February 25, 1980. On that day, 17-year-old Christine was hired to look after a little girl named Cassidy Johnson. The child was just 2 years old and at a very playful stage of her growth. Her loved ones called her Pongacito and enjoyed her antics. The girl's parents went out to work, collecting worms to sell as fishing bait. But that day, something went terribly wrong. 5 hours after being left alone with Cassidy Johnson, Christine was calling emergency services. She said the little girl had fainted and fallen from her crib. An ambulance was quickly dispatched to take the child to Tallahassee Hospital. The doctors did everything they could to revive Cassidy Johnson, but without success. One of the doctors noticed a strange bump on the child's head. Christine explained that she had lost consciousness and fallen from her crib. Cassidy Johnson was diagnosed with brain inflammation, possibly caused by an infection. Sadly, after being hospitalized for 2 days, she passed away. The Johnsons, the girl's parents, were utterly devastated, and Christine was also deeply saddened. All accounts agree that at least one of the doctors involved in Cassidy Johnson's case had doubts about the cause of the problem. In fact, he suggested that the police be notified of the possibility that there was more to the girl's death than an accident or brain inflammation. At this point in the story, accounts of what happened vary. Some sources claim that the doctor who wanted to notify the authorities was ignored by his colleagues, while others say the police were notified but did not act. It was also said that the doctor wrote a note for the police, but it never reached its destination. Finally, other reports claim that the police did indeed summon the young babysitter. The officers questioned her but found nothing to justify her detention or to warrant a more extensive investigation. What is certain is that the case was never thoroughly investigated, although the autopsy clearly showed that the head injury played a significant role in Cassidy Johnson's death. After the 2-year-old's death, Christine, apparently devastated, decided to move to another city and ended up relocating to Lakeland, Florida. There, she slowly began to work as a babysitter again, demonstrating the same efficiency she had shown in her initial jobs. A year had passed since the death of Cassidy Johnson, and by then, Christine was 18 years old. Some distant relatives asked her to take care of their 4-year-old Jeffrey Davis. Once again, tragedy struck when the boy suddenly stopped breathing for no apparent reason. Christine called emergency services and Jeffrey's parents, but there was nothing they could do. The boy arrived at the hospital already deceased. In this case, as the cause of death was unknown, an autopsy was performed. The doctors concluded that Jeffrey had died from myocarditis, an inflammation of the heart muscle that reduces the heart's ability to pump blood. A virus can cause myocarditis, an adverse reaction to medication, or a general inflammatory condition, which can sometimes lead to sudden death. With this result, no one suspected the babysitter. The parents accepted the doctor's diagnosis of their son's sudden death. Once again, the young caretaker appeared devastated, and this time it wasn't just any death, it was a family member. Just 3 days after Jeffrey's unexpected death, Christine was asked to take care of another child, Joseph Spring, for a few hours. Joseph, a 2-year-old cousin of Jeffrey, needed care while his parents attended Jeffrey's funeral. Incredibly, the tragedy repeated itself. A few hours after leaving Joseph with Christine, the child was dead. Christine claimed she had left the boy sleeping and then heard a scream. When she ran to see what had happened, she found Joseph dead. The health professionals who examined Joseph's body concluded that both Jeffrey and Joseph had died from the same cause, myocarditis caused by an infection. Although no one had concrete evidence or real arguments, rumors began to circulate in the town about the string of coincidences surrounding Christine's babysitting jobs. Even Christine herself started saying that a curse seemed to follow her, bringing death to the children she cared for. The babysitter appeared deeply affected, and everyone knew she had some mental disabilities, but no one really believed she was capable of murdering the children. Consequently, as suddenly as they started, the rumors began to die down. Voices of consolation emerged for young Christine, telling her to calm down and that it was all a series of unfortunate events. Christine gained even more sympathy when she was hospitalized with a viral infection in her digestive system. But this brought a new question. Had she infected the children she was caring for with a virus that proved fatal for them? But very soon, Christine was cleared of the initial suspicions when the doctors found no connection between the virus she had contracted and the one that caused the children's myocarditis. The general conclusion was that bad luck was solely responsible for the deaths. Consequently, Christine was seen almost as a victim. Besides being physically unattractive and mentally underdeveloped, she seemed to be followed by misfortune. Those who knew Christine defended her passionately. They couldn't conceive that she could be responsible for the children's deaths or even capable of harming a child in any way. Additionally, at that time, infant mortality was relatively common in impoverished areas of the cities. After these harsh experiences, Christine decided to move back to her hometown of Perry. On her own initiative, she decided to stop caring for young children. With that decision made, she took the necessary steps to get certified and registered to care for the elderly. Soon, she began working for William Swindle, a 77-year-old man diagnosed with terminal cancer. William lived alone and needed someone to help with household tasks, shopping, cooking, organizing the house, assisting with his needs, and keeping him company. However, the new caregiver didn't even get the chance to prove she could care for the elderly, because on her first day, William passed away. As in so many previous instances, Christine called emergency services, who found the man unconscious on the kitchen floor. He was rushed to the hospital, but he was declared dead upon arrival. Although no autopsy was apparently performed, the cause of death was listed as a massive heart attack. A week later, in the midst of a hot summer, Christine decided to go out with her stepsister, Betty Jean Daniels, who was 19 years old. It was July 14, 1981. Christine accompanied Betty to a vaccination center so that Betty's baby, Jennifer Daniels, could receive her immunizations. On the way home, Betty stopped at a store to buy some diapers and left Christine in the car with the 8-month-old baby. When she returned with her purchases, Christine told her that it seemed the baby had suddenly stopped breathing. Initially, the mother was not alarmed. She said that sometimes babies breathe so softly that it's barely noticeable. But when she checked Jennifer, she realized the baby was indeed not breathing, and her skin had a bluish tint. The distressed mother immediately drove to the nearest emergency room, where the baby was declared dead. It was thought to be a case of sudden infant death syndrome or a rare reaction to the vaccines received. At this point in the story, part of Christine's life goes unaccounted for. There is a period of about a year during which there is no information about her activities. The next reference takes us to July 2, 1982, when Liz Coleman asked Christine to babysit her 10-week-old son, Travis Coleman. It should be noted that other sources claim the baby was 10 months old. Apparently, Travis had been very sick with pneumonia, but had recovered. Since he was now perfectly healthy, his parents wanted to go out that night to celebrate the end of that stressful chapter. At that time, Christine was living with her boyfriend, Robert Johnson, in a trailer. She told Mrs. Coleman to bring the baby to her trailer and pick him up the next morning, assuring her she would gladly take care of him for the night. Sadly, as you might imagine, when Liz arrived the next morning to pick up Travis, the baby was dead. Christine appeared shocked and claimed that the last time she saw him alive was at 3 a.m. when she changed his diaper and gave him his prescribed medicine. She said that at that moment, the baby was fine and soon fell asleep again. Authorities were called and an autopsy was conducted to determine the cause of death. Initially, it was thought to be a new respiratory problem or a relapse of the pneumonia he had suffered. However, during the post-mortem examination, specialists found internal injuries consistent with mechanical asphyxiation. Meanwhile, Christine was interviewed by a local news outlet about Travis's death. She stated that she had experienced the deaths of 5 children, and although she didn't know what was happening, it was enough to scare her. Travis was Christine's last victim. The medical personnel notified the police that the baby's death was intentional. The police immediately arrested Christine, who soon became known as the babysitter killer. Christine was subjected to police interrogations and evaluated by psychiatric specialists. It wasn't long before the 19-year-old confessed. Christine claimed she heard voices in her head telling her, kill the baby," which wouldn't stop until she did it. She also gave some personal reasons for committing the murders. Her account was both sad and chilling. Referring to her first victim, Cassidy Johnson, Christine said they had been playing outside, and the girl was very agitated. When it was 8 o'clock and the child wouldn't calm down, she suffocated her until she stopped breathing and turned purple. Her heart had stopped, her pulse was gone, and she wasn't breathing. Christine tried to resuscitate her, but couldn't. Regarding the case of Jennifer, Christine explained that the little girl was constantly crying, which drove her crazy. So she put her hands around her neck and squeezed until she stopped. About what happened with Travis, Christine said the baby was sleeping, and she just smothered him for no reason. She continued to give gruesome details, telling authorities that she copied the method from something she saw on television, but added her own touches. She described it as an easy and simple method. After adding that she killed them without knowing why, she explained that she would place a blanket over their mouth and nose and press until they stopped moving, ensuring no one could hear them scream. When she learned she could be sentenced to death in the electric chair, Christine pleaded guilty to the 3 described murders. She claimed she had nothing to do with the others. Authorities were confident that the other 3 victims were also killed by her. But by then, it would have been very difficult to prove, so they decided to leave it at that. In late 1982, Christine Falling was sentenced to 3 concurrent life sentences, with the possibility of parole after serving 25 years. 3 years after entering prison, Christine also confessed to the murder of William Swindle, the 77-year-old patient who lived only a few hours after being placed in her care. In prison and over the years, specialists have stated that Christine did not actually hear voices in her head. Behind bars, she returned to her old habit of claiming to suffer from numerous and strange illnesses, frequently visiting the doctor. Officially, Munchausen syndrome was never diagnosed, but when she had her first opportunity to apply for parole in 2007, a mental health specialist said he believed she indeed suffered from the syndrome and consequently posed a danger to the public. No one came forward to speak on Christine's behalf, and her early release was denied. She had another opportunity before the parole board in 2017, but again, her request was denied. According to one source, her case could be reviewed again in 2024, while Christine continues serving her sentence at Lowell Correctional Institution in Ocala, Florida. Before concluding, it's worth noting that besides the children mentioned in this case, there were reportedly 3 others whom Christine may have also tried to kill. But fortunately, she did not succeed. Leading the list is a 3-year-old named Kylie Summerling, who became seriously ill while in Christine's care. The child was diagnosed with meningitis, but thankfully survived. The other 2 were brothers Charles and Jeffrey Hale, aged 3 years and 14 months respectively. Both also became seriously ill while under Christine's care and required hospitalization, though the details were not specified. The Hale brothers were lucky and recovered from their illnesses. Today, working parents who must leave their children in the care of babysitters have tools to monitor what happens in their homes while they're away. Security cameras and even apps that allow real-time viewing of what happens at home are measures available to protect children from potential abuse by caregivers. However, things were very different in the 1980s. In the book Murder in America, someone once asked Christine what she would like to do if granted freedom, and she said she would love to return to babysitting because she claimed to love children to death. In the fall of 2012, Lizzie Marriott began her studies in marine biology at the University of New Hampshire. To reduce her living expenses, she moved out of her family home in Massachusetts, where she lived with her parents, Bob and Melissa Lizzie, and relocated to Chester to live with her aunt and uncle, Tony and Becky Hannah. Lizzie quickly became a beloved member of her aunt and uncle's family. She had a passion for marine animals, which led her to pursue a degree in marine biology. Although she was now 2 hours away from her parents, they remained close and kept in regular contact. Lizzie was known for her kind, gentle, and sweet nature, which made her a favorite among those who knew her. Lizzie's aunt recalled that whenever Lizzie came home, she'd exclaim, "I'm home," and it filled their hearts with joy. Lizzie was thriving in her new life, with new opportunities opening up in her free time. She had found a job at Target, where she quickly fit in and earned respect from her colleagues. That's where she met Kate McDonough, an 18-year-old who quickly became a close friend. They girls often hung out after work, and one day, Kate invited Lizzie over to her apartment. On subsequent invitations, Lizzie was happy to accept. Lizzie and Kate planned a cozy evening with dinner and a movie on October 9th. However, Kate's boyfriend Seth joined them, bringing a lively atmosphere. Seth was a man of many talents, with a theater arts background and a black belt in karate. Lizzie's family and friends expected a fun evening together. When she failed to return home at the agreed-upon time, her relatives initially thought she might have stayed overnight at a friend's place and then headed to university. However, when she didn't show up the next day, her aunt and uncle grew concerned and contacted her parents, who were also unaware of her whereabouts. Lizzie's parents immediately drove to Chester, reporting their daughter's disappearance to the police along the way. The investigation began, and the police questioned everyone who knew Lizzie, but her relatives had no idea where she had gone. Fortunately, a friend named Nate revealed that he thought Lizzie might be with Kate McDonough. Nate asked Kate if she had seen Lizzie. Kate replied that she hadn't. Detectives began investigating the new information provided by Nate. In the meantime, they discovered that her bank accounts showed no activity and her phone was dead. This led them to rule out the initial theory that she might have been involved in an accident. Shortly after, her car was located. After interviewing her friends and co-workers, investigators gathered some information about Kate and her boyfriend, Seth. Lizzie and Kate's acquaintances have noticed they spending increasing amounts of time together despite their vastly different personalities. Outwardly, Lizzie is sociable and compassionate, whereas Kate is known for being rude. The reason behind their close relationship remains unclear. Lizzie was once a cheerful person, but after meeting Seth, she changed. Her co-workers noticed a difference, and she distanced herself from relatives who disapproved of Seth's behavior. They started dating when Lizzie was 17 and moved in together in Dover, New Hampshire, after she turned 18. On October 12th, authorities questioned Kate and Seth separately, but at the same time. This tactic helped investigators gather more information. For 2 hours, Kate consistently denied ever having met Lizzie on October 9th, but then she stopped cooperating completely with the investigation. Seth, on the other hand, was more open with the details. He contradicted Kate's account, saying that Lizzie was actually at their place on the 9th. Seth described the events of that day, saying that he, Kate, and Lizzie watched a movie together, played strip poker, and then engaged in a consensual threesome. However, the situation becomes tragic when things don't go as planned. Lizzie accidentally dies while tied with rope. Too shocked and afraid of being misunderstood, Seth and Kate decided to dump Lizzie's body into the Piscataqua River on Pierce Island. After being questioned for 11 hours, Seth accompanied police to the location and reenacted how he and Kate threw the body off the cliff. Lizzie's parents doubted Seth's account of her death, insisting she was in a loving relationship with Brittany and wouldn't cheat or take her own life. They urged police to find her body for a proper burial. The search continued with volunteers and a detective, but strong river currents made it possible her body was swept to the Atlantic. The investigation into Lizzie's death continued with a search of Seth's apartment. Detectives found the apartment cluttered and disorganized with evidence of Seth's interest in occultism and black magic. A search of the surrounding area turned up a bag in a trash container containing black leather gloves, a sweatshirt, and men's underwear with DNA from both Seth and Lizzie, confirming their intimate relationship. The sweatshirt was identified as Lizzie's by her family. Later, Kate McDonough confirmed some of his account. According to Kate, she, Seth, and Lizzie spent the evening of October 9th watching a movie and playing strip poker, which eventually led to a consensual intimate encounter involving rope bondage, which Lizzie had agreed to. Lizzie Marriott was having a good time until she suddenly had a seizure, suffocated, and lost consciousness. She stopped breathing when Seth and Kate lifted her up. Kate thought it was an accident, but an unexpected witness's testimony took the investigation in a new direction. A young woman visited the police station, claiming to have crucial information about the Lizzie Marriott case and requesting to speak with the lead detectives. During the conversation, she introduced herself as Catherine Fish, Seth Mella's ex-girlfriend. Her statements implied that Seth was capable of murder. She revealed that Seth had once confided in her about a fantasy in which she took someone's life. To understand Catherine's testimony, it's essential to examine her past relationship with Seth. They met 10 years ago, and initially Seth seemed attentive and caring. However, during their first intimate encounter, Catherine discovered Seth's interest in BDSM. Seth initially seemed great, but he revealed a cruel and controlling side over time. He didn't tolerate disagreement or boundaries. After sharing dark fantasies, kind of felt trapped and scared, especially when Seth physically attacked her, grabbing her throat and refusing to let go despite her pleas. This incident shattered her illusions about their relationship. After moving to a new city, kind of felt isolated and alone, dependent on Seth. As his behavior escalated, he introduced other women, proposing a polyamorous relationship. Kind of felt trapped, afraid to leave due to Seth's controlling behavior. It took months for her to gather the courage to escape the toxic relationship. In May 2014, Seth Mella appeared in court, facing not only intentional murder charges, but also accusations of taking advantage of multiple individuals. Several people testified against him, including Kate McDonough. 2 months after Lizzie's death, Kate was arrested and held in custody on charges of obstructing justice and interfering with the investigation. During her time in custody, Kate had ample opportunity to reflect on the events and consider who she was protecting. While imprisoned, Kate and Seth stayed in close touch and envisioned a life together in a country where they could not be extradited. They shared dreams of getting married, starting a family, and building a future, but their escape plans stalled in the winter of 2012. Seth convinced his cellmate, Ryan Bachman, who was about to be released, to help their escape. The plan was for Ryan to use his bank account to withdraw money, buy drugs, and sell them to increase their initial investment. They intended to use the money to purchase guns, 2 cars, explosives, and a boat. Ryan had different intentions and chose to keep the money for himself, causing Seth to give up on their plan to escape. Meanwhile, authorities became aware of their scheme. Seth wrote to Kate and hinted at a reunion in the afterlife, suggesting he believed in its existence. This could imply that Seth was vaguely suggesting Kate should consider ending her life to join him in the afterlife. As time passed, Kate's thoughts became clearer, allowing her to make a more rational decision when the prosecutor's office presented her with a favorable deal in 2014. Under the agreement, Kate was required to reveal the truth about the events that occurred on the evening of October 9th, and in return, her potential 20-year prison sentence was significantly reduced to 3 years. This offer was especially beneficial in light of the circumstances that later came to light during the investigation. As part of their agreement, acknowledged that she was deeply intimidated by Seth and followed his instructions without hesitation. Over time, Seth had slowly stripped Kate of her autonomy and stifled her ability to make decisions for herself. Approximately 6 weeks before the tragic event, Seth had asked Kate to arrange a threesome with someone else while she was away on a 10-day theater tour, but Kate was unable to find someone to participate. Over time, Seth's messages to Kate became increasingly aggressive, transitioning from giving her instructions to making threats. He warned her of severe consequences if she didn't meet his demands, which included bringing a friend to participate in his plan. Kate invited Lizzie to visit her at home, and Lizzie agreed because she trusted Kate and had been to her place before. However, Kate didn't tell Lizzie that Seth would also be there, as she knew Lizzie might be hesitant. Seth had seen Lizzie's photos and was eager to meet her. On October 9th, Seth arrived at Kate's apartment at 9 p.m. At first, Kate and Lizzie chatted together, and Seth joined in later, initially creating a light-hearted atmosphere with his jokes and friendly demeanor. As they watched a movie, Seth suggested playing strip poker, dimming the lights to create an intimate setting. Lizzie began to lose the game, eventually ending up in her underwear. In another round, suggested kissing Kate, but she refused, explaining that she was in a committed relationship and found the idea unpleasant. Seth suggested leaving Lizzie alone, but she refused. He retrieved a rope and gloves from his room, returned, and strangled her with the rope before she could react. After killing Lizzie, Seth committed a further act of violence against her body. His girlfriend, Kate, was present but did not intervene, claiming she was too scared to act. She feared that she would become the next victim if she tried to help. Later, at around 1 a.m., Seth and his girlfriend wrapped Lizzie's body in tarpaulin and placed it in a suitcase. They then transported the suitcase to Lizzie's car and drove to Pierce Island by the river. From the observation deck, they removed Lizzie's body from the suitcase and threw it off the cliff. After the incident, Kate and another person cleaned up inside her car. Then they drove to the campus parking lot where Kate parked her vehicle. From the parking lot, they walked a 10-mile distance to Kate's home. The experience left Kate severely shaken, and she went into shock. She was also fearful of testifying against Seth in the future, worrying that he might intimidate or silence her due to concerns for her safety. During the trial, Kate's excessive sobbing raised suspicions, with some doubting her emotional display in suggesting she was a skilled actress. Kate's defense claimed that Lizzie's death was an accident during intimacy, but acknowledged that Seth and Kate had disposed of the body. They alleged that Seth isolated and coerced Kate, affecting her mental state. The prosecution focused on deliberate murder, citing the discovery of gloves at the scene, which suggested premeditation. Roberta Gherkin and Paul Hickok, acquaintances of Seth Mella, testified for the prosecution. After Lizzie's murder, Seth called them at 10:49 p.m. asking for help. When they arrived after 11 p.m., they found Seth on the bed next to Kate McDonough in lingerie. Seth said, "This time things went too far." Roberta found Kate in the kitchen and suggested calling an ambulance. They chose not to intervene or contact police, avoiding involvement. Seth Mella was convicted of first-degree murder by strangulation and conspiracy in 2014, receiving a life sentence without parole. Kate McDonough, who was 20 at the time, got a 3-year sentence as part of a plea deal and was released in 2016. She has since maintained a low profile. Lizzie Marriott's parents, Bob and Melissa, do not feel the sentence is sufficient. They hope her case can serve as a warning to others, especially women. They created a memorial bench in her hometown since her body was never recovered. This story is set in Medicine Hat, a small city about 200 miles southeast of Calgary, known as Canada's sunniest spot. It's a lively town favored by young, outdoorsy families, offering plenty of natural beauty and activities. The Richardson family enjoyed all the perks of life here. Deborah and Mark Richardson, along with their children, 8-year-old Tyler and 12-year-old Jasmine, represented a typical family unit. Deborah and Mark originally met in 1990 at a gym in Ontario where they both attended classes, including one for substance abuse recovery. They had conquered their past addictions by the time they met, and after moving to Medicine Hat, they started their family with Jasmine, followed by Tyler 4 years later. Their life in Medicine Hat was peaceful. Their home was modest, and both children were thriving and healthy. Jasmine especially was doing well in school and was known as an honor student at just 11 years old. She was cheerful, pretty, and had a contagious smile, much like her mother. However, as Jasmine entered her teenage years, her personality began to shift, a common scenario for many teens. Although she started this phase as a happy church-going student, her demeanor changed dramatically when she discovered the internet. While she continued to be bubbly and friendly in person, online she adopted a completely different persona. Jasmine became active on social media platforms like MySpace, where her profile gradually shifted from light and girly to a darker, gothic theme. She also joined Vampire Freaks, a site aimed at connecting those interested in goth, punk, and emo subcultures. Her profiles showcased her in thick eyeliner, alternative clothes, and posing with prop guns. Jasmine's social media profiles were a clear window into her teenage interests. Piercings, tattoos, Tim Burton movies, toy guns, and loud music were all the rage among emo teens in the mid-2000s. She used a made-up name and claimed she was 15. She liked talking to older people, trying to seem as mature as they were. Her parents did their best to help her through these tough changes by suggesting they spend more time together and find activities they could all enjoy. But Jasmine wasn't interested. She saw her younger brother Tyler as a bother and hardly spoke to him anymore. Jasmine could spend hours at her computer chatting with people she'd never met in person. Her parents, Deborah and Mark, believed this was just a phase. They thought she would eventually grow out of it and become more sensible. So they were pretty lenient about her new interests. She regularly attended local music shows that catered to the younger crowd. Jasmine, only 12, would typically go to these events with a group of her friends. However, it was at one of these punk rock concerts that things began to take a troubling turn. At this show, Jasmine met a 23-year-old named Jeremy Steinke. Jeremy was a troubled individual. He had dropped out of high school after enduring severe bullying and had since refused to seek employment. Instead, he lived in a trailer park with his mother, who struggled with alcoholism and had unstable relationships, leading to a revolving door of men in their home. These men were often abusive towards Jeremy, adding to his difficult circumstances. Jeremy had a tough life, often facing physical abuse from his mother's boyfriends. At 23 years old in 2006, he was without a job and spent most of his time chatting online with much younger girls. Jeremy saw himself as a bit of an oddball, a view that his friends agreed with, especially when he shared some strange facts about himself. For instance, Jeremy claimed to enjoy the taste of blood and said he drank it regularly. He even carried a vial of blood around his neck for whenever he felt the urge to indulge in this unusual craving. Jeremy also had a peculiar claim that he was a 300-year-old werewolf. This strange assertion left many skeptical, especially because Medicine Hat had seen many full moons without any incidents, leading some to dismiss his claim as nonsense. Jasmine first encountered Jeremy at a local punk rock concert where she falsely told him she was 15, though she was really just 12 years old. Despite the age difference, this did not seem to bother Jeremy, who had a preference for younger girls because he found them easier to influence and control. They started exchanging messages across various social media platforms. As the months passed, Jeremy and Jasmine's conversations became more frequent and intense. Jeremy's alternative lifestyle and interests began to shape Jasmine, pushing their chats into a disturbingly romantic direction. Influenced by Jeremy, Jasmine started to embrace a darker, gothic lifestyle. Jeremy's declaration of love was extreme. He gave Jasmine a vial of his own blood, similar to one he wore. This relationship soon became known to Jasmine's parents, who were understandably shocked and worried upon discovering her involvement with an older man. They promptly grounded her and confiscated her computer to cut off communication. To help Jasmine break away from what they saw as a harmful relationship, they decided to seek the help of a psychologist. They truly believed that counseling would repair and strengthen their bond with their daughter. To their relief, it seemed to work. Jasmine appeared to be cooperating and moving back towards a more normal life. She promised her past behaviors were behind her, and so her parents gave her computer back. This decision, however, would tragically lead to their undoing. But did Jasmine cut ties with Jeremy? Not at all. They soon reconnected, this time more secretive than before. Jeremy was infuriated by her parents' interference, expressing his anger through dark, aggressive poetry. He even fantasized about dramatic and violent actions against her parents, echoing a disturbingly romantic notion of eliminating obstacles to their relationship. Jasmine, perhaps influenced by Jeremy's intense emotions, also expressed extreme sentiments in her messages, joking about drastic actions against her own parents to be with Jeremy. While it's common for teenagers to express frustration with their parents, the context here was far more serious, given Jeremy's manipulative nature and his influence over Jasmine. This situation was not just teenage melodrama. It was being shaped by Jeremy's dark fantasies, blurring the line between jest and potential reality. The Richardson family continued their daily lives, seemingly content. Mark and Deborah were relieved to see their daughter Jasmine showing signs of improvement, and their son Tyler was enjoying his carefree childhood as a cheerful 8-year-old. Unknown to them, a sinister plan was being formed behind a computer screen, with Jasmine involved in plotting against her own family. Jasmine often complained to her friends about how much her parents annoyed her, expressing a desire to end their lives, but nobody took her seriously. On the night of Saturday, April 22, 2006, as Mrs. Richardson was getting ready for bed, she heard a noise in the basement and thought it might be rats. She went downstairs to check, flipped on the light, and to her shock, saw a person in a ski mask standing there. She screamed in fright, and the masked person rushed at her, trying to silence her. Despite his efforts, Deborah fought back, screaming even louder. The attacker then stabbed her repeatedly with a knife. Hearing his wife's screams, Mark grabbed the nearest thing he could find, a screwdriver he had left out from fixing an outlet earlier that day, and ran to the basement. He arrived to find his wife in a pool of blood and confronted the attacker, only to be stabbed in the stomach and then multiple times more. As he lay dying, Mark asked, "Why?" The attacker coldly responded, "Because your daughter wished it." Upstairs, their young son Tyler was left alone, sitting on his bed in his pajamas, too scared to move as he heard the footsteps approaching his room. The door then slowly opened. The next day, on a calm Sunday, April 23, 2006, the neighborhood was quiet, with families engaged in their usual weekend activities. It was a typical Sunday with children playing outside, including a boy who decided to visit his friend Tyler. However, when he knocked on the door of the Richardsons' home, no one answered, even though their car was parked in the driveway. Puzzled, the boy peeked through a basement window and was startled to see a motionless figure on the floor. Alarmed, he rushed home to inform his mother, who promptly called the police. The police arrived to find the door unlocked and the house disturbingly quiet. Their investigation began in the basement, where they discovered the lifeless bodies of Deborah and Mark Richardson in a gruesome scene, surrounded by pools of their own blood. Deborah had been stabbed 12 times in the chest, and Mark had suffered 24 wounds to his chest and back. The tragedy extended further as the police found Tyler's body in his bedroom, surrounded by blood-soaked toys with multiple stab wounds and his throat cut. As the officer surveyed the scene, family photos hinted at a missing member, Jasmine. Initially, it seemed like a brutal home invasion, possibly involving Jasmine's abduction. An Amber Alert was issued for the missing girl as police started to investigate, beginning with her school and friends. A shocking discovery came when they accessed Jasmine's school locker. Among her belongings, they found a disturbing stick figure drawing depicting a family walk that ends in horror. The sketch showed one family member retrieving gasoline from a truck, dousing the others and setting them on fire. This grim drawing suggested a very different narrative from an abduction, hinting at Jasmine's involvement in the tragedy. When authorities found the chilling drawing in Jasmine's locker, they began to view her disappearance with suspicion, suspecting that she might be involved in her family's murder. Prompted by Jasmine's friends who revealed Jeremy's affection for Jasmine and disturbing remarks about harming her parents, police quickly started looking also for Jeremy. These leads, coupled with a slew of digital evidence from messages, emails, and chat logs, helped investigators piece together a grim motive. Soon, the story of the suspected killer couple was making headlines, shocking and horrifying the Medicine Hat community. Detectives turned to the media to help find Jasmine, hoping she would make contact or that someone would provide information that could lead to her. Due to her age, Canadian law prohibited the media from publishing Jasmine's real name, so news agencies started referring to her simply as JR. However, police uncovered that a few hours after the crime, Jasmine and Jeremy were seen at a restaurant and later at a party hosted by an acquaintance. Witnesses at the party noted that Jasmine seemed normal, showing no signs of abduction or shock. She was seen drinking and enjoying herself. When questioned by friends about how they managed to escape from her parents, Jasmine laughed and remarked, "Jeremy and I just took care of them." To which Jeremy added, "I carved them up like fish." The party guests thought this was a dark joke, not realizing the truth in their words. Their infamy led to their downfall. Within 24 hours of the murders, they were spotted in the community of Letter, Saskatchewan, about 100 miles from Medicine Hat. Police found them sleeping in a pickup truck and arrested them without resistance. Despite their arrest, Jasmine and Jeremy seemed indifferent, showing more annoyance than remorse. During interrogation, their apparent unity crumbled. Jeremy confessed that Jasmine had implored him to eliminate her parents, promising to do anything for her. In turn, Jasmine pinned the blame solely on Jeremy, claiming her previous talks of killing her family were just jokes and she never intended any real harm. However, Jeremy's version aligned more convincingly with the extensive digital evidence, suggesting that both had actively participated in the planning and execution of the crime. The burning question was, what exactly was their plan? On the night of April 22nd, Jasmine stealthily let Jeremy into her house. She then went upstairs as Jeremy headed to the basement. There, he confronted Deborah and brutally attacked her with a folding knife. The noise woke Mark, who rushed to help his wife, only to find himself in a deadly struggle. Mark dashed towards the basement upon hearing a disturbance, only to discover his wife on the floor with a masked man looming over her. A struggle ensued as Mark attempted to wrestle the knife away from the intruder, but tragically, he was overpowered and sustained multiple stab wounds to his chest and back. As he lay fading, he managed to ask the assailant why, to which the chilling reply was, "Because your daughter wanted it that way." Mark succumbed to his injuries shortly thereafter. While this grim scene unfolded downstairs, Jasmine was upstairs, supposedly tasked with killing her younger brother Tyler, who was peacefully asleep. The accounts of what happened next vary significantly between Jasmine and Jeremy. Jeremy asserted that Jasmine had acted alone in killing Tyler. Jasmine, on the other hand, claimed she initially hesitated, and it was Jeremy who urged her to go through with it. She admitted to stabbing Tyler, albeit reluctantly, which she described as weakly. However, evidence showed that Tyler had been stabbed 5 times, including a severe laceration to his throat. After the murders, Jeremy left the scene, leaving Jasmine alone in the house with the bodies of her family. She then took a taxi to Jeremy's trailer, escaping the horrific scene she had left behind. During the trial, a taxi driver testified about picking up Jasmine shortly after the murders. Remarkably, she appeared calm and greeted him cheerfully, showing no signs of distress despite the recent loss of her entire family. After being picked up, Jasmine reunited with Jeremy, and the two spent the next 24 hours together, seemingly unaffected by the gravity of their actions. They were observed being affectionate in public, even visiting friends and boastfully discussing what they had done. Their lack of remorse extended even after their arrest. Interestingly, authorities allowed them to exchange letters, possibly hoping to gather more evidence from their communication. In these letters, Jeremy proposed to Jasmine, and she accepted, further demonstrating their disconnect from the severity of their situation and the normal responses expected under such circumstances. After Jasmine claimed that Jeremy was solely responsible for the murders, the pair faced their trials a year later, in June 2007. Jeremy, being an adult, was subjected to the full extent of the law. His defense painted him as a psychologically weak individual with low self-esteem, blaming his violent actions on a history of abuse from his mother's lovers and a desperate craving for affection. They argued that he sought Jasmine's love to fill the emotional void from his troubled childhood, a sentiment echoed by his friends who said he would do anything for her affection. Nonetheless, such explanations did not excuse the heinous nature of his crime, and Jeremy was sentenced to 3 life terms with a possibility of parole after 25 years. Jasmine, referred to as JR in court due to her age, was also found guilty of murdering her family. The digital evidence and her behavior before and after the murders painted a clear picture of her involvement. Her lack of remorse was striking, especially when she was observed smiling while recounting the events of her family's deaths during her testimony. However, because she was a minor at the time of the crimes, the harshest sentence she could receive under Canadian law was 10 years, which included psychiatric care and monitored living in a community setting rather than traditional incarceration. This lighter sentence reflects the complexities of dealing with young offenders, even those involved in grave crimes. During her incarceration, Jasmine was often cited as a model of successful rehabilitation. Through therapy and severing ties with Jeremy, she began to show genuine remorse for her actions, convincing the authorities responsible for her rehabilitation that she was unlikely to reoffend. The person in charge of her expressed hope for her transformation, suggesting that her family, had they survived, might have been proud of her progress. He reminded her that while the past cannot be changed, she has control over her daily actions and behavior. In the last 5 years of her sentence, Jasmine studied under a new identity to help her reintegrate into society. She was released in 2016 and has since lived anonymously among the public. Meanwhile, Jeremy remains incarcerated, a situation many deem appropriate considering his predatory behavior prior to the murders. The debate over Jasmine's sentencing remains contentious. Some argue that if someone is old enough to commit a crime, they should face the full consequences, while others believe that Jasmine, who was only 12 at the time and manipulated by an older man, deserved a chance for rehabilitation. After maintaining a clean record for 5 years following her release, Jasmine's criminal record was expunged, allowing her a fresh start without the burden of her past crimes. Mark and Deborah Richardson are remembered as caring parents. The complexity of Jasmine's case raises difficult questions about justice, punishment, and rehabilitation, especially considering her age and the influence exerted by an older individual. While 10 years may seem short given the severity of the crime, the circumstances of her age and manipulation add layers of complexity to the discussion of her case. Canada's judicial approach often emphasizes rehabilitation over strict punishment, which sets it apart from places like the US, where the focus might lean more towards punitive measures. This philosophy raises complex questions, especially in cases like Jasmine's. Despite being only 12 years old when she committed her crimes, the severity of her actions, killing her entire family, is undeniable. This leads to a significant debate. Can someone who has committed such grave acts be fully reformed and trusted once released? Case of Lindsay Wilson. In the spring of 1999, the community of Southport in the United Kingdom was divided into two camps. The media and television were filled with numerous interviews with Mitchell Quay, a man who, though unremarkable at first, had become a true folk hero. His sudden popularity was sparked by a scandal: the mysterious disappearance of his wife, Lindsay Wilson. According to him, one day she left home without a trace, leaving behind two young children. Her distraught husband appeared worried and abandoned, pleading for her to reconsider and return. Along the way, he shared details of their marital life, occasionally speaking unfavorably about his spouse. He believed her behavior was driven by a desire for a free and extravagant lifestyle. Mitchell mentioned seeing his former beloved driving around town in an expensive car, although she just passed by. Most likely, the grief-stricken mother had left her children for a wealthy fiancé. Despite the image portrayed on TV, in reality he was enjoying a bachelor's life. As a result, one segment of the population sympathized with the lonely man, offering him attention and support, while the other doubted him and suspected him of a horrendous crime. While Mitchell enjoyed widespread attention, law enforcement continued to search for the missing woman. His persona did not inspire trust, and there were complications in the case. According to Lindsay's relatives and friends, the couple's relationship was different from what her husband claimed. Everyone who knew her considered her a faithful wife and caring mother. Therefore, they were convinced something terrible must have happened to Lindsay. Otherwise, she would have made contact long ago. Suspicion was fueled by Mitchell's words during a famous talk show. When the host asked if he had ended his wife's life, his guest said he would not respond to such an indecent question, then paused and added, "Wait and find out." What was the exemplary husband and father implying? Perhaps he knew more than he shared, or was he so confident in his innocence that he was just waiting for everything to fall into place? Answers to these and other questions are forthcoming. At 17, Lindsay discovered she was pregnant. Raised in a caring, large family, she hadn't imagined becoming a mother so early. She wasn't unprepared emotionally, but the fact that her boyfriend, with whom she'd been since she was 13, fled as soon as he learned about the impending fatherhood, both upset and scared her. Lindsay knew all too well the physical and financial demands of motherhood. The Wilson family, though loving and close-knit, had often faced financial challenges to provide for their children. Her parents worked tirelessly. Therefore, when Lindsay met Mitchell Quay 5 months into her pregnancy, she considered it a gift of fate. Mitchell, a 20-year-old, acted like a true gentleman, being attentive and caring. Most importantly, her delicate condition did not deter him. Mitchell assured her he had fallen in love with Lindsay at first sight and wanted to spend his life with her and raise the child as his own. At that time, he was earning well and even started working extra hours, so his beloved would want for nothing. The young couple's parents were shocked when they announced their decision to marry. They felt the 5-week-old relationship hadn't withstood the test of time and circumstances, and thus couldn't genuinely celebrate for them. The only thing Lindsay's relatives noted was that her former cheerfulness and good health had returned. At the same time, the new boyfriend seemed overly sweet to them, even cloyingly polite. Ultimately, no one interfered with their marriage, keeping their doubts to themselves. Red flag. The wedding took place in August 1995, within a close family circle. The majority of the guests were from the bride's side. The groom's side was represented by no more than 5 people: his parents, a brother, and 2 friends. During the celebration, Lindsay was ecstatic, believing she had won the lottery in life. However, the uneasy premonitions of Lindsay's relatives grew heavier when, by the end of the evening, the newlyweds had a dispute. The conflict unfolded before everyone's eyes. Something displeased Mitchell, and he started to shout loudly. It was unlikely that the reason was significant or appropriate for such a reaction. During the argument, he grabbed his new wife by the hand and started shaking her, which looked more than odd and threatening. Lindsay tried to calm him down. When the emotions subsided, The man apologized to everyone and later made light of the incident, emphasizing that it was just nerves due to the holiday bustle. At that moment, the girl did not give due attention to the situation and quickly forgot about it. However, in reality, it became one of the red flags in their toxic relationship. On February 5, 1999, a social worker officially reported Lindsay missing, expressing concern over being unable to reach her client. Lindsay had sought psychological support in a short period of their life together due to recurring incidents of domestic violence and had bravely reported the situation at home. After her disclosure, the social worker had been monitoring the young family. She informed the police that she had been unable to contact Lindsay for several weeks. Every time she visited the home, Lindsay's husband would answer the door, and he was also the first to answer any phone calls. The dedicated worker mentioned that she repeatedly asked to speak directly to Lindsay, but received evasive excuses. During her visits, she consistently left her contact details, yet Lindsay never called back. The social worker found this situation unsafe and requested a welfare check. Law enforcement responded to the report and visited the address, but were also unable to speak with Lindsay. Her husband, Mitchell, explained that he had not seen his wife at home for a long time, but did not consider her missing. According to him, on Christmas Eve, Lindsay had gone to a party with a friend and returned home early in the morning, somewhat intoxicated. They had an argument, and afterwards, Lindsay packed her belongings and left, without saying goodbye to the children. He claimed she left him for another man and no longer wanted any contact. The search for Lindsay began. During conversations with her relatives, officers learned that she was last seen by her family on December 11th, appearing in high spirits, looking well, and her behavior was normal. Her family had grown accustomed to her troubled marriage. Lindsay's mother also reported that she had tried multiple times to reach her daughter on December 24th, to arrange a visit to give Christmas gifts to the grandchildren. Unable to reach Lindsay, she decided to visit in person that day. Mitchell answered the door with the children and told her that his wife had left with friends and accused her of infidelity. However, Mrs. Wilson had long learned to take her son-in-law's words with a grain of salt. After giving the gifts to the children, she left. Detectives found it strange that no one had been concerned about the young woman's well-being for 2 months. However, there was an explanation. Everyone knew that Mitchell restricted his wife's interactions with the outside world, even with close relatives. They had previously experienced difficulty communicating with her, therefore it was plausible for Lindsay to drop out of sight for a while. Nonetheless, this did not mean they were not concerned about her. The news alarmed them. Everyone asserted that she did not drink and led a modest lifestyle. Moreover, her husband had forbidden her all contact with the outside world, not to mention meetings with friends and acquaintances. Mitchell told the police contradictory information that aroused the investigators' suspicions about his character. It seemed unlikely that Mitchell could simply let his wife go and that Lindsay would leave her children with a tyrannical husband. However, the situation demanded a thorough investigation. To this end, the police spoke with all of Lindsay's acquaintances and tried to find anyone who had seen her after the family gathering. They also questioned neighbors and requested surveillance footage from the residential complex where the couple lived and its surroundings. Unfortunately, all footage had been deleted by the time Lindsay's disappearance was noted. Some time had elapsed. However, another date was discovered when she was last seen in person. On December 15th, she was at the local post office sending several letters and postcards as usual. Her older sister also admitted that they met that day. Lindsay had visited despite Mitchell's disapproval. The sisters had tea and a brief conversation, after which Lindsay saw her guest out. On the way, she slipped a note into her sister's hand and asked her to read it later. The sister put the note in her purse and in the whirlwind of days forgot about it. Regrettably, the older sister couldn't find it later, and its contents remain unknown. After that day, no one saw Lindsay again. Over several months, investigators tried to cling to any information. They began to suspect that she was no longer alive, as she had not been in contact for so long. They couldn't charge Mitchell without sufficient grounds and evidence. However, the more they learned about the couple's life history, the stronger their suspicions grew. Shortly after their wedding, Mitchell and Lindsay decided to move away from their parents. They rented an apartment in Southport. Sometime later, Lindsay gave birth to a daughter named Robin. The only shadow over the joy of the new baby was her stepfather's volatile temper. After moving, the young wife fully experienced her husband's unstable moods. One moment he could be joking and laughing, the next he became unbalanced and aggressive. Trying to maintain a fragile peace at home, she didn't realize how completely she had submitted to his will. He controlled every step she took and caused a scene whenever she failed to hear the phone or answer a call. However, loud arguments were often followed by passionate reconciliations. Mitchell would kneel, beg for forgiveness, and profess his love. It seemed for a while that peace had returned to the family, but then the cycle would start again. Conflict, reconciliation, repetition. Lindsay began to lose recognition of the man she loved. She often told her relatives about what was happening. They advised her to return home and end her suffering, but it was hard for the young woman to admit her mistake. In one interview, the Wilsons mentioned that she always lived with thoughts of the past. Each time, her husband assured her he would change and everything would be fine. As a loving wife, she wanted to believe him and waited for him to return to his former self, gentle and caring. Meanwhile, Mitchell increasingly tightened his grip and control. He forbade his wife to go out alone in the evenings and eventually restricted her from being anywhere without him. He was jealous of her every move, yet he himself was seen in dubious liaisons. Once, Lindsay confided to her older sister that she suspected her husband of infidelity. She told her about a woman who came to their home looking for him and was very surprised to learn he was married. That day, another argument erupted, but this time it escalated to physical violence. Gradually, physical abuse became a part of their life. To prevent his wife from complaining about him and tarnishing his reputation, the man began to limit her interactions, starting with neighbors, friends, and acquaintances, and later with her family. Despite being unhappy, Lindsay still tried to maintain contact secretly, fearing being discovered and punished. At the same time, despite the evident problems, Lindsay continued to stay with Mitchell. Along with her feelings, the comfortable life he provided was a factor. He earned well, supporting her and their child, paying the bills. She truly lacked nothing financially. The era of living in a gilded cage came to an end for Lindsay when she found out she was pregnant again. At that moment, she was certain she no longer wanted more children. It's only fair to note that Mitchell was good to his stepdaughter, even loving her. However, Lindsay deemed the current circumstances unfavorable for bringing another child into the world and decided to terminate the pregnancy. When her husband learned of this, he became enraged, hurling insults and physically intimidating her. That same evening, she packed her things, took her child, and returned to her parents' home. Her family breathed a sigh of relief. There, she proceeded with the pregnancy as she had planned. Over time, however, she began to miss her husband. He wouldn't leave her alone, frequently calling and begging her to come back. Mitchell tried everything to prove he had changed, and eventually he managed to convince Lindsay. Initially, everything went well, and it seemed as if their old feelings had returned. The couple was expecting another child. This peace lasted for 6 months until Mitchell had a severe anger outburst. Fortunately, he did not direct his rage at his pregnant wife, but took it out on the apartment. He smashed everything he could see, destroyed furniture, ripped doors off their hinges, and even stained the walls with blood and food remnants. He threw the television out of the window and smashed the car parked outside. The landlord demanded not only compensation for the damage and repairs, but also that they vacate the apartment. This situation worsened the family's financial position, requiring additional expenses. As a result, the couple had to take out a large loan and move to a more modest apartment. You can't run from yourself. In October 1997, their son Jack was born. Mitchell adored the boy. However, the relationship between the spouses became increasingly tense. Throughout their married life, Mitchell frequently left home, sometimes for a few days, sometimes for a week, often over trivial or fabricated reasons. Lindsay had grown accustomed to her husband's behavior, yet when he abandoned her again, she filed for divorce and returned to her parents' home. Apparently, she realized she couldn't cope with the separation on her own. Therefore, she reached out to a local charity that assists women in difficult life situations. They helped her find subsidized housing in another city. Lindsay feared that Mitchell would discover her new address or phone number, so she took measures to distance herself from him. After he made several threats, she even obtained a restraining order from law enforcement. Mitchell remained unpopular with Lindsay's relatives. They too wanted nothing to do with him. Ultimately, their communication nearly ceased. Despite all efforts, Lindsay repeatedly returned to the abusive relationship. Thus, her circle saw no point in trying to save her anymore. They accepted the situation and stepped back. However, this time, her decision proved to be fatal. At the outset of the investigation into Lindsay's disappearance, Mitchell was initially helpful in the search efforts. However, as the case gained media attention, his focus shifted dramatically. He turned his misfortune into a public spectacle, becoming a media figure in the process. As Mitchell invited more journalists into his home, his abundant media appearances began to seem less genuine, with viewers often noting a smirk on his face. Lindsay's parents considered their son-in-law to be involved in their daughter's disappearance, and detectives also viewed him as the prime suspect. Yet, the lack of direct evidence tied their hands. Searches were conducted not just at the couple's home, but throughout the area. After a provocative question during a televised interview, the antagonist became even more brazen, even declaring that the time would come when his wife's family would have to apologize for their suspicions. On the eve of the holiday season, Mitchell sent a postcard to the lead investigator on the case. Attached to it was a pack of hair dye. Instead of a festive greeting, Mitchell wrote, "I hope this covers your gray and gives you a bit more confidence," mocking the detective and displaying his own arrogance. In February 2000, Mitchell found himself at the center of a scandal with a tarnished reputation. It became known that he had been forging his wife's signature to receive social benefits, serving as another indirect proof of his involvement in Lindsay's disappearance and presumed demise. The investigators wanted to latch on to a financial motive. However, the suspect's popularity worked in his favor. Many supporters emerged, arguing that as a single father, he had every right to financial assistance. These circumstances hindered the detectives' ability to bring the charges they desired. Nevertheless, they managed to charge him with fraud. Mitchell was brought to court for the benefit fraud and was found guilty, sentenced to a month of community service. This time, Mitchell couldn't walk away unscathed. The forgery of his missing wife's signature appeared more than suspicious. The number of angry comments increased. Eventually, the man's patience snapped and he began lashing out, blaming the media for intruding into his personal life. The case of Lindsay Mitchell's disappearance might have remained unsolved had it not been for a clue discovered by chance. On June 1, 2000, a park goer noticed his dog acting strangely near the roller coaster at a city amusement park. The animal uncovered human remains. Specialists were called to the scene and the remains were sent for forensic examination, which revealed that they were parts of a female torso. Genetic testing confirmed they belonged to Lindsay, who had been missing for a long time. This breakthrough revitalized the investigation, making it clear that Lindsay had been the victim of a brutal crime. The focus now was to find the perpetrator. On June 7th, Mitchell was brought in for questioning. The detectives were determined, and after more than 36 hours of intermittent interrogation, the suspect broke down under the pressure and confessed to the dismemberment murder. On December 15, 1998, after meeting with her sister, Lindsay informed her husband that she wanted a divorce. This time, she was resolute. According to Mitchell, this news infuriated him, leading him to attack and strangle her. The incident occurred in front of their children. He then hid her lifeless body in their bedroom, stuffing the gap under the door to mask any odors. Realizing he couldn't dispose of the body alone, he enlisted the help of his brother Elliot, a butcher, who he thought could assist. Elliot was initially hesitant, but was eventually persuaded by Mitchell. While the children played in the next room, they dismembered Lindsay's body and later dispersed her remains across the city. During his confession, the murderer expressed no remorse or empathy. Instead, he seemed proud of his actions, stating that without his confession, they would never have proven his guilt. The next day, he led them to the other locations where he had hidden her limbs. Sadly, her head and one hand were never recovered. The forensic comparison confirmed that the remains were indeed Lindsay's. There was no doubt about Mitchell's guilt. The final judgment at the trial of the Key brothers took place in January 2001. The court proceedings were swift and straightforward. Mitchell was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 17 years. The court-appointed psychiatrist noted that the defendant showed all the signs of being a narcissist with sadistic tendencies. His brother, Elliot, received a 7-year sentence for his role in concealing the crime. Lindsay's children were taken in by her maternal grandparents, who gave them their surname. Just 3 months after the sentence was handed down, another tragedy struck the Lindsay family. One of Lindsay's older brothers, unable to cope with the shock, took his own life in the attic of their family home. In his farewell note, he wrote that he saw no point in continuing in such a cruel world, and wished to reunite with his sister. As of 2017, Mitchell Kwai has been eligible for parole. However, as of January 2023, his lawyer's requests have been denied 3 times. Lindsay's family, including the children, are concerned that the murderer might eventually be released. Consequently, they have started a petition urging that he remain incarcerated. As long as the voices of the victim's family are considered, the criminal will continue to serve his sentence. Regardless, no punishment can bring Lindsay back. Experience shows that most women with domestic Stockholm Syndrome try to adapt to their abusers throughout their lives. Even when their families come to their aid, they continue to act against their own best interests. In such cases, only deep self-reflection in psychotherapy can help. If the victim does not come to realize the recklessness of their actions, the end of the relationship will be dire. James Lloyd Allen was born in Providence, Rhode Island, USA, on August 29, 1954. He was one of 3 children born to Lloyd James Allen and Jacqueline Allen, with siblings named Danny and John. The Allens were a typical middle-class family, closely knit and active members of St. Thomas Church. The only out-of-the-ordinary aspect was Lloyd's job. He was a police captain in Providence. As a child, Allen admired his father and the idea of doing things right, though he still found time for some mischief during his school years. Allen is remembered by his family and friends for secretly listening to his favorite baseball team, the Boston Red Sox, on a radio earpiece during class, hoping the nuns wouldn't notice. Growing up with strong values of service, he eventually followed in his father's professional footsteps. His faith also remained a crucial part of his life. By the late 1970s, during weekly prayer meetings at St. Thomas Church, Allen's attention was drawn to a woman named Marge, who was from Bristol and 4 years his senior. Despite the daily demands of his police work, Allen was too shy to approach her. However, fate intervened when Marge was robbed and contacted the police. It turned out her home was in the area Allen patrolled. When responding to the call and finally meeting her, he found himself in a comfortable role. After taking her statement, he made several follow-up visits, which led to dating. They married in 1988 at St. Thomas Church. She was 38, and he was 34. Allen and Marge had different personalities, but they shared the same core values and a deep love for each other. This love was the foundation of their wonderful family. They had 2 daughters, Jennifer and Caitlin. Allen wasn't the handiest person around the house, but he was a dedicated dad who adored his daughters more than anything. To support his family, he also worked a second job as a security guard at a supermarket on the east side of the city, which allowed Marge to stay home and take care of their daughters. Their marriage was mostly peaceful. They enjoyed staying in to watch TV or play with their daughters rather than going out. The only real disagreement at home was about baseball, since Marge was a big Yankees fan and she passed that passion on to her daughters. So whenever they watched games together, there was a bit of a friendly rivalry. As the girls grew up, Marge started working at St. Thomas School. James, on the other hand, was all in on his job in public service, truly embodying what it meant to be an excellent police officer. His coworkers and friends saw him as a man of integrity, with a lot of compassion for crime victims and a knack for solving crimes. His amazing memory and observational skills, along with his resilience and courage, were what made him stand out. He always went the extra mile and was ready to answer calls even in the middle of the night. By 2005, he had become one of the most seasoned detectives in the department, honored with numerous medals, including the Departmental Medal of Honor and the Purple Heart. Known for his signature trench coat, rain or shine, James brought laughter and comfort to Marge and their friends. Meanwhile, Esteban Carpio lived nearby and seemed to be on the wrong side of the law. Born in Boston, Massachusetts on July 30th, 1978 to an unknown father, Esteban was raised by his mother, a third-grade teacher. There isn't much known about his early years. As an adult, he worked as a barber and had a history of legal troubles related to substance possession. In the early 2000s, he started a relationship with Samani Finn. They later had a daughter together. Esteban's behavior started to change for the worse in late 2004. He began acting oddly, claiming to hear voices and believing that a friend had cursed him or used voodoo on him. Whether true or not, his girlfriend took him to a Buddhist temple for help, where a monk tried to protect him by tying a rope around his waist. But it didn't help, and his condition didn't improve. So his mother called for a psychiatric evaluation. The doctors linked his issues to stress and substance abuse, but it's unclear if any steps were taken to address his substance use. The following year, with no improvement in his condition, his mother, Yvonne Carpio, took him back to the hospital. That spring, Esteban crossed paths with Madeline Gatta, an 84-year-old active woman who loved her craft of sewing. She had worked as an interior decorator and had created custom designs for various clients. She was also a proud grandmother to 6 grandchildren and 3 great-grandchildren. On April 16, 2005, after finishing work early in the afternoon, Detective James grabbed a quick bite at a favorite spot before heading home. Meanwhile, Esteban, who was driving nearby, spotted Madeline. Seeing her as an easy target, he quickly got out of his car with a knife. He tried to steal her purse but ended up hurting her with the knife. Her screams alerted people nearby, and one quick-thinking neighbor noted Esteban's car license plate as he ran away. Madeline was taken to a health center where she managed to report what happened. Around 7 in the evening, James's phone rang at home, and he promptly answered. The call was about the attack on the elderly woman and the suspect's clear description, prompting the detective to spring into action. The police team, including James, arrived at Esteban's residence the next day. According to statements from Esteban's family, they warned the officers that Esteban was experiencing a mental crisis, having trouble sleeping and was not in his right mind. Minutes later, he was taken to the Providence police station for questioning. Once there, he was led to a conference room on the 3rd floor, and as he was not under arrest, his handcuffs were removed. Detective James, assisted by another detective, began the interrogation. James was armed as per regulation. Initially, Esteban provided a false name, denied any previous arrests, and claimed innocence. When Detective James warned him that he knew his real identity and was aware of his criminal record, Esteban became agitated and asked the other detective for some water. After the other detective left the room, Esteban managed to seize James' gun under unclear circumstances and lock the door from the inside. Timothy, the other detective, later recounted hearing Detective James screaming for help, saying Esteban was going to kill him. Shots were heard, and when they finally broke down the door, they found James dying from 2 fatal wounds, one to the chest and another to the forehead. Esteban had attacked the detective with his own gun and escaped by shooting out a window in an adjoining room, falling onto the grass below. A chaotic scene ensued outside the police headquarters as local, state, and federal officers launched a relentless citywide manhunt for the suspect. Meanwhile, James was rushed to Providence Hospital, but despite all medical efforts, he was declared deceased. Esteban was apprehended after an hour-long search, following a violent confrontation with a taxi driver. His capture was not easy. He was combative and violent. The police officers struck him 3 times in the face. From there, the officers took him to Rhode Island Hospital, where he was administered sedatives and later interviewed. The exchange was captured on a recording that clearly showcased Esteban's distressed voice. At the same time, the doorbell rang at the Allen home. While their daughter slept, went downstairs to find 3 officers at the door. She invited them in, and they delivered the tragic news inside. Marge, stunned, asked where it had happened. Learning it was at the police station, she couldn't believe it. Of all places, that should have been the safest for a police officer. From that moment, her mind struggled to function normally, and the pain hit her heart. The officers called friends of the Allens to stay with the girls and then escorted Marge to the hospital in a patrol car, as only a direct relative could claim the body. She later recounted how the hospital corridors were filled with police officers, all nodding respectfully as she passed. They led her to the trauma room. Her husband lay on the table. The wounds were lethal, yet not visible. On Monday, April 18, 2005, at 10 a.m., a second interview took place at police headquarters. A hysterical Esteban was interrogated again. During the interview, Esteban often rambled, insisting he was insane and unloved. This exchange was also recorded. Meanwhile, the police chief and James's colleagues gathered at the Providence District Court awaiting Esteban's arraignment. Beyond showing solidarity and affection for their fallen comrade, they wanted to see the man capable of such actions. The tension in the room was palpable as all eyes turned to Esteban, who walked with difficulty, his hands and feet shackled. Several officers escorted him. He had bruises and cuts on his face and wore a white mask covering from his chin to his eyes, making him resemble Hannibal Lecter from The Silence of the Lambs. The moans and screams of his mother and girlfriend soon followed. His mother immediately accused the police of beating her son. Officials struggled to remove both women from the courtroom as they continued to cry out about cover-ups and police brutality. Esteban's face was bleeding and sweating. His eyes were swollen, and his cheeks, forehead, and skull area were severely bruised. His face was marred with multiple bruises and scars. However, such a mask, known as a spit shield, is used by law enforcement when a suspect is injured or combative. Due to Esteban's previous state, the officers decided to take maximum precautions and placed a spit shield on him. They explained that he had injured a leg, an arm, and his head when he jumped out of the window. When accused of murder, he responded by nodding, not denying the crime committed. He only spoke to tell his mother he loved her as he was escorted out of the courtroom. Subsequently, Esteban was detained without bail. Given that the victim was an on-duty police officer, the charge carried a maximum sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. As is common in such cases that shock the public, a press conference led by the police chief was necessary. However, many questions remained unanswered as he did not explain how Esteban managed to seize the officer's gun or the details leading up to the sequence of gunshots. He also did not discuss weapon-carrying protocols within police facilities or associated interrogation procedures. Nor did he mention if there were any witnesses. Instead, he expressed heartfelt words for Detective James. James was posthumously promoted to the rank of Detective Sergeant. On April 21, 2005, a sea of police officers and officials accompanied the procession preceding his funeral service. Although it could have been held at the downtown cathedral, Marge chose differently, faithful to the story that had always connected them to St. Thomas Church. The funeral service was held there. After the religious ceremony, James was taken on a 4-mile final journey to St. Anne's Cemetery by a horse-drawn carriage. Marge was moved to see thousands of people, including police officers from across the country, lining the route. Beyond the crime and ensuing mourning, the case of the detective brought to the forefront a long-standing concern: the security in government buildings. Unfortunately, it wasn't the first time such an incident had occurred. For some time, visitors to the Providence Police Building had to pass through a metal detector. What no one had anticipated was that an individual would disarm an officer of his service weapon. In this context, Michael Brady, a police procedures expert and professor at the University in Newport, Rhode Island, mentioned that it was not unusual for a detective to interrogate a suspect while armed. Thus, James was not doing anything different from what police officers do daily across the country. However, The controversy over alleged police abuse against Esteban dominated headlines and online news portals. Later, an investigation by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, concluded that there was no excessive force by the Providence police, who were compelled to subdue the man due to his violent behavior. It was a special agent from the FBI who presented the report to the press, adding that if the subject resisted the police officers, they were fully justified in using whatever force necessary to subdue him. Despite these claims, Esteban's family continued to insist on the accusations against law enforcement and highlighted Esteban's mental disorder. His defense team centered their strategy around his mental disturbance. During the trial preparations, Esteban was evaluated by several mental health experts. The defense enlisted a psychiatrist and forensic neuropsychologist. After reviewing Esteban's medical records from hospital visits prior to the incident and listening to tapes of post-arrest interviews, these specialists concluded that the accused suffered from schizophrenic psychosis and an acute onset of paranoid psychosis. The state's evaluation was conducted by neuropsychologist and Professor David Faust and forensic psychiatrist and psychiatry professor Martin Kelly. Insanity defenses are used in a small fraction of U.S. criminal cases and are rarely successful. According to experts in psychiatry and law, jurors might be skeptical that mental illness absolves someone from a crime or fear that a not guilty verdict could ultimately release a dangerous individual back into society. Esteban was charged with assaulting Madeline, the 84-year-old woman, with a knife, as well as the murder of James. The trial began in June 2006. In his opening statement to the jury, the defense attorney acknowledged that the evidence of his client committing the actions was overwhelming. However, the key question for him was whether Esteban was too disturbed to be held fully accountable. One of the first witnesses was a police officer who admitted during his testimony that Esteban had been beaten during the arrest. On June 19th, the accused mother and his 24-year-old girlfriend testified about Esteban's alarming behavior prior to the incidents. Following their testimonies, 2 doctors took the stand. Both specialists argued that the accused lacked the capacity to commit the crime due to the severe effects of schizophrenia and thus should not be held fully responsible. The next day, the state countered by presenting Professor David and forensic psychiatrist Martin. Professor David testified that he had examined the results of psychological tests administered to the accused while he awaited trial at the Adult Correctional Institute and concluded that the administration of the test and subsequent results were questionable and that Esteban's responses indicated feigning and malingering. Forensic psychiatrist Martin then testified that at the time of the crimes, Esteban did not suffer from any mental disease or defect that would have prevented him from understanding the wrongfulness of his actions or conforming his conduct to the requirements of the law. In summary, they described him as manipulative with a pronounced criminal and antisocial profile. After about 9 hours of deliberation, the jury rejected the insanity defense and delivered their verdict, finding Esteban guilty of first-degree murder of Detective James. He was also found guilty of firing a weapon during a violent crime that resulted in death and of assaulting Madeline with a dangerous weapon. Meanwhile, the cries of Esteban's family members filled the gallery. The court offered to consider a new trial motion after the July 4th holiday, but Esteban's defense attorney emailed the court on July 5, 2006, indicating that no such motion would be filed. The sentencing hearing took place on October 6, 2006. In his first public statement since the trial began, Esteban told the court that his life and health were fine until something happened one day that he could not control. Then, in tears, he apologized to the Allen family for what had occurred. The judge then sentenced him to 2 consecutive life sentences, one without the possibility of parole for the crime against James and an additional consecutive 20-year sentence for the aggravated assault on Madeline. The judge harshly addressed the defendant, stating that the court had no doubt he was incorrigible. Thus, allowing even the possibility of parole was antithetical in a civilized society. The Attorney General released a statement hours later, praising the judgment as a gesture to honor the memory of one of the best officers of the Providence Police Department. Subsequently, the Rhode Island Supreme Court upheld the convictions and denied the defense's request to reduce the life sentence without parole. As for Madeline, she recovered without complications. Since James' burial, Marge made it a habit to visit her husband's grave about 4 times a year. She always smiled, remembering that James rested near a cemetery path. After all, watching who passed by was part of his job. She consistently left floral arrangements that included a white rose with no particular reason for choosing that color. But it became a tradition for the detective's widow. In 2015, on the 10th anniversary of her husband's death, Marge found the courage to consider her first interview. She acknowledged that for the first 9 years, a physical pain in her chest prevented her from speaking. However, she eventually overcame the pain. During that interview with a reporter, she felt free to criticize the negative press often directed at law enforcement officers. Marge knew firsthand that police work is challenging and involves making difficult decisions. Once she broke her silence, she also addressed the numerous accusations of racism associated with her husband's case. When asked if speaking out would help her find closure, she disagreed with the term, stating there is no closure, just time that always flies by, gradually healing the wounds. Case of Mia Skadhu-Steven. Herein lies a crime that shocked the nation of Denmark, a country renowned for its peace and low crime rate. On February 5, 2022, it was Saturday night. Mia Skadhu-Steven, 22, and her friends were excited for a night of partying and good times. Mia had just completed her second semester in nursing school and eagerly anticipated socializing with her friends. It was a cold night in Aalborg, with temperatures dipping below freezing, and Mia, just like many other partygoers, dressed for the indoor bars and clubs she planned to visit. She wore a black top and black pants, her long curly blonde hair cascading down her sides. Comfortable white sneakers adorned her feet, and she carried a black purse slung over her shoulders. She appeared no different from many other university students looking to unwind and enjoy their weekend. Mia danced and drank to her heart's content, enjoying herself before they finally ended up a club Vox. The club closed at 6 in the morning. Everyone was tired, but Mia wanted to continue the party. Her friend remembered that she was slightly drunk and dancing with strangers while hugging people she had just met. Nothing unusual for a friendly 22-year-old in Denmark. Outside the club, Mia and her friends briefly talked, before deciding to go their separate ways. A friend assumed that she would take the bus home and planned to follow up with her later. 13 hours had passed since Mia bid farewell to her friends. Her family grew increasingly worried as they hadn't seen or heard from her. They first checked with her boyfriend, assuming she might be with him or that he might know her whereabouts. To their surprise, he claimed he hadn't heard from Mia. This greatly worried them, because Mia was known to be responsible and always informed them if she had changed plans. Contacting her friends did little to ease their concerns, as no one had any contact or knowledge of Mia's whereabouts since 6 a.m. that morning. Her parents became extremely worried, prompting them to file a missing persons report with the North Jutland Police Department. Desperate, Mia's family also took to Facebook publicly requesting help from anyone who might know her whereabouts. The community rallied behind them, sharing posts and spreading the word. Given the circumstances of her sudden disappearance and knowing her responsible character, the North Jutland police took no chances. Despite Denmark's low crime rate, they treated her case as a worst-case scenario, believing that investigating and locating her as early as possible gave her the best chance of being found. Police promptly initiated an extensive investigation imploring the public to safeguard and provide any photographs or videos captured by mobile phones, cameras, or other devices from the vicinity that morning. They were aware that this was a bustling area, well known and frequented by numerous individuals, and there had to be someone who possessed information about Mia, deliberately or inadvertently recording her on camera. The responses were staggering. Close to 400 calls, images, recordings, and messages flooded in from residents throughout North Jutland following their appeal for information. The country genuinely came together to assist in locating Mia. What remained was the laborious undertaking of painstakingly analyzing hours of footage for any clue regarding Mia's location. Mia's background was that of a normal 22-year-old with no criminal history. Born on September 19, 1999, she began her academic journey at Vesthimlands Gymnasium in 2016. Her pursuit of nursing led her to the University College of Northern Denmark, UCN, in Aalborg. On February 7, 2022, 26 hours had passed since Mia was last seen. The police once again appealed to the citizens of North Jutland, urging any eyewitnesses to come forward with information on Mia's whereabouts. Meanwhile, they meticulously combed through the footage retrieved from the surrounding area. Detectives began cross-examining people who knew Mia and anyone warned she may have spoken with that night. A major clue emerged from CCTV footage dated Sunday, February 6th at 06:09 a.m., showing Mia standing at a bus stop at Vespo number 99. A black car stopped at the nearby Netto store, and after a brief conversation, Mia was seen getting in. The next bus was not due until 7:35 a.m., nearly 90 minutes later. It was a cold morning with temperatures hovering around freezing, and Mia was not dressed for the cold. The footage was alarming. Mia did not hail the car. Instead, the car stopped next to her. Frank Olson, head of the investigation, stated that it appeared the driver contacted her first. Her friends and parents claimed it was out of character for her to get into a stranger's vehicle. Police speculated that the driver might have offered her a ride as an illegal taxi, a common practice in the area to avoid tax and licensing costs. However, this was purely speculation, supported by the fact that her bus home was not due for a long time. Due to the limitations in the quality of the footage, the police could not clearly identify the vehicle's license plate and once again appealed to the public for help. On February 8th, police shared the sequence of events leading up to Mia getting into the vehicle. After saying goodbye to her friends around 6:02 a.m., Mia walked from Jonfru Annegade, took a left on Borgegade, and then another left into the Vespi district. She walked to the bus stop at Vespo number 99, waiting for her bus home. The black Volkswagen stopped moments later, and the driver engaged her in conversation. She got in and had been missing since. That same day, a breakthrough arrived. The police managed to identify the vehicle's license plate with the help of new footage and technology. The vehicle had parrot plates, a Danish term for a license plate with more than one background color. February 9th, 2022, 11:20 a.m. 53 hours have now passed since Mia disappeared. Police successfully traced the license plate to several addresses, specifically in Eremjorsk, Skorping, and a summer house in Sultum. Amongst these locations, they located the vehicle matching the CCTV footage, a 2015 Volkswagen Golf, at one of the addresses. Although Mia had not yet been found, this critical lead led to the arrest of two men. Both were childhood friends, and their connection to the vehicle's license plate brought them to the forefront of the investigation. These two men were known to the authorities for their history of petty crimes, including an incident where they had impersonated police officers at a soccer game. The men denied any involvement, but the vehicle being tied to them built a suspicious case against them, marking a significant turning point in the investigation. Within 24 hours, the police brought the two suspects to a constitutional hearing. In Denmark's legal system, a constitutional hearing is a preliminary court session held soon after an arrest, usually within 24 hours. The arrested individuals must be brought before a judge along with the evidence that led to their suspicion. During the hearing, the judge examines the evidence and decides whether to keep the suspects in custody or release them. This process outlined in the Danish constitution ensures the rights of the accused are protected while maintaining public safety. February 10th, 2022. It had now been 4 days since Mia went missing. Mia's family, friends, and the community continued holding on to hope for her safe return. At the constitutional hearing, held in private at the Aalborg District Court, it was determined that one of the two men arrested could be released from detention, though the charges against them could continue to be investigated. The other man, however, a 36-year-old named Thomas Thompson, was to remain in custody. Thompson even voluntarily agreed to be detained for 4 weeks. Thomas Thompson, an electrician, was described as polite, charming, neat, and proper. He was a sergeant in the armed forces and had practiced judo since his youth. The black Volkswagen was registered to Thompson, making him the most likely driver who picked up Mia the morning she disappeared. In fact, the police traced his movements using his vehicle's GPS system. Although the system had been manually turned off, for hours before Mia was picked up, the digital forensic team managed to retrieve much of his route. Consequently, the police's massive investigation focused on this route and his residences. They combed through multiple locations, including Thompson's residence in Flensgold, a summer house in Hammarby and Erland Starkov. Clues began to emerge, painting a grim picture of what happened to Mia. Leading into the Hammarby forest from a clearing along the road, police dogs located Mia's keys, an elastic hairband and 2 breast patches. These belongings were spread over a distance, indicating she may have been running and dropping them along the way. Their worst suspicions were confirmed in the forest area of Erland Starkov, a 10-minute drive from Thompson's home in the village of Flensgold. Here they discovered several shallow holes, which appeared to be dug by hand. Within them were dismembered human remains, hacked into over 200 pieces. The police assumed the worst, believing these remains likely belonged to Mia, and sent samples for confirmation. That very night, on February 10th, the police held a press conference to share these details with the public, sadly, but clearly stating their belief that Mia had likely been murdered and dismembered, and they would push on with the investigation. On February 12th, in 2022, 2 days later, the remains were confirmed to be Mia, dismembered into 231 body parts. The coroners determined the body was dismembered with an electric saw, a hobby knife, and scissors. Some parts were partly dissolved with a strong alkali solution, such as sodium hydroxide. The cause of death was determined to be strangulation. What happened that day? Thomas disconnected the GPS in his car at 2:14 a.m. on February 6th, planning to avoid being tracked while he was out on the prowl. However, due to a fortunate technical error, the GPS still logged its position every 15 seconds. When confronted about why he disconnected the GPS, Thomas claimed he did this to avoid a certain police officer who, according to him, harbored a grudge and harassed him at every opportunity. His GPS was turned back on at 9:23 a.m. It's assumed that what happened to Mia occurred between 6:09 a.m. when she entered the vehicle and 9:23 a.m. At 6:09 a.m., Thomas stopped next to Mia, rolled down the passenger side window, and offered her a ride, which she accepted, sitting down next to him. The trial took place in June 2023, according to Thomas's claimed, in his own words, "I see her standing with her bare arms. Then I wonder if she would like me to give her a ride." He said he pulled over and offered Mia a lift for free. According to him, Mia was flirtatious in the car. He drove them towards the training ground at Camp Hammer in Hammarby because he wanted to show Mia something cool. When they arrived, they mutually agreed to have sex. But at one point, she became enraged when she learned he had been a sergeant. Thomas later explained in court that during this time, Mia accidentally fell and suffered a fatal twist to her neck, or was perhaps strangled by her backpack straps when she got out of the car with him in the wooded area of Hammarby. It's important to point out that his statements were contradictory. Initially, he asserted that she didn't stumble and fall until a considerable time had passed. However, in a subsequent statement, he mentioned that she tripped while exiting his vehicle. These inconsistencies raise questions about the reliability of his narrative. He acknowledged that he panicked and didn't know what to do, so he put her body in his car and drove it back home, where he dismembered her. He initially tried to use alkali to dissolve her body, but when that didn't work, he gave up and chopped her into pieces. He then partly buried her remains and scattered some in a deserted area in Erland Starkov. Additionally, he burned buckets, tools, coveralls, a car mat, and possibly her bag in a fire, but he couldn't remember where. The police suspect that Mia entered Thomas's vehicle, expecting him to drive her home, since the next bus wouldn't arrive until 7:35 a.m. However, either through deception or coercion, Thomas took Mia to Hammarby against her wishes. There she was, chased, overpowered, raped, suffocated, and mutilated. They completely reject Thomas's claim that she died from an accidental fall. Coroner Asa Hedda Thompson from Aarhus University, who performed Mia's autopsy, testified on June 23rd. He cited systematic dismemberment intended to obscure the cause of death, but believed suffocation was likely. A fall, as described by Thomas, would be impossible. Thompson emphasized that sexual assault had occurred and that strangulation was the cause of her death, although crucial body parts confirming suffocation were missing. Other evidence indirectly supported this theory. Evidence suggests Mia ran for her life. Her belongings were scattered across the forest. Her hairband was found on the dirt road, her keys further down, and 2 chest patches in the dark forest where Thomas claimed they never went. The GPS recorded 3 stops on the dirt road. Special prosecutor Met Bendix argued this indicated Mia fought for her life, dismissing any notion of mutual consent. The police believe Thomas committed these acts to fulfill deviant sexual gratification through control and power. Further evidence showed Thomas cruising around Aalborg with the GPS off that night before the murder. Before heading out, he watched porn featuring younger girls online. Due to the extensive tampering with the body, no scene traces were found. However, the police remained steadfast in their belief that rape occurred. DNA from Mia was found on the door handle to Thomas's bedroom, confirming she was dismembered at his home. In fact, Thomas maintained the facade of a completely normal life while dismembering Mia's body over several days. He bought pizza and sweets, went to work, and texted his friends with jokes and emojis, as if nothing had occurred. If he was shocked by her accidental death, he sure didn't seem affected by it one bit. If anything, he seemed pleased with himself, as if he had gotten away with murder. According to the prosecutors, he believed he did. Thomas Thompson was born on June 18, 1985. Thompson was raised in SE and later moved to Falkenskald, a small town with 500 residents. Initially living in an apartment, he later moved into his grandparents' farmhouse. Raised in stable conditions without violence, crime, or abuse, Thompson made a career in the military as a sergeant before training as an electrician. He was considered good at his job, but was described as a loner by those who knew him in the village. In 2009, Thompson was convicted of being a peeping Tom after leaving semen on a girl's window. The incidents occurred in 2005 and 2006 in Frederick, Maryland. He would knock on the windows of 2 girls, identified as Louise and Maria, and masturbate. Thompson was only charged in Louise's case because semen was found on her window. Maria vividly recalled the humiliating experience, describing how she had gone to bed when someone knocked on her window in the middle of the night. Thinking it was a friend, she turned on the light but saw nothing due to the darkness outside. When she rolled up the blinds, she saw a man with his pants around his ankles, masturbating in the pouring rain. She remembered his blank, staring eyes and ran to wake her parents, who then contacted the police. Thompson's DNA also matched a trace from an old assault case involving a sleeping woman in Aalborg in 2010. The incident occurred in an apartment at Jamruangad, where 2 women woke up to find a man sexually assaulting one of them. The man fled, and the case remained unsolved when Thompson picked up Mia Scott Hogseven in his car. It was also near Jamruangad. The connection between the cases has only recently been made, likely due to advancements in DNA technology. However, the statute of limitations means Thompson cannot be prosecuted for the 2010 assault. Nevertheless, the 2 women involved and a witness have been summoned to testify in the current case. The testimonies of Thompson's ex-girlfriends also painted a disturbing picture. They described how he quickly went from charming and polite to controlling, arrogant, and manipulative. He insisted on having things his way and would get angry if he didn't get it. This behavior was corroborated by his childhood friend. The ex-girlfriends also recounted instances of transgressive sexual behavior, lies about his age, and surveillance both during and after their relationships. A woman testified that he had tied her naked against her will. Another reported that her brake lines had been cut after their breakup, an act for which Thompson was convicted in 2010. A third woman discovered an Excel sheet listing women and their sexual activities on specific dates. Thomas Thompson pleaded not guilty to rape and manslaughter, admitting only to the indecent handling of corpses. The court could not find sufficient evidence to prove he raped Mia or exposed her to sexual relations beyond his claim of mutual intercourse. Thus, he was only found guilty of attempted rape. Only the killer, Thomas Thompson, and his victim Mia Skadhog, Stephen know exactly what transpired that morning in the deserted forest area of Hammer Bakkar, It was there that he drove the slightly intoxicated young woman after trapping her in his car following several hours of driving around searching for a potential victim. In June 2023, the now 38-year-old electrician Thomas Thompson was convicted of murdering Mia Skidhog Stephen. He was also convicted of attempted rape and indecent treatment of a corpse. The court noted particularly aggravating circumstances and sentenced Thompson to custody based on a mental evaluation conducted during the case. The Council of Forensic Medicine stated, "He is domineering, manipulative, and not reflective in relation to guilt. There is a high risk of repetition of violence and crimes of immorality." They concluded that Thompson posed a significant danger to the life, limb, and health of others if found guilty of the crime. Thompson continues to maintain his innocence regarding the charges of murder and attempted rape. Immediately after his sentencing, he appealed to the High Court. He's expecting to hear the judgment on his appeal by the end of May 2024, hoping for an acquittal or a lighter sentence. In the face of such tragedy, Mia's parents linked the community for their outpouring of support. They wrote, "Thanks for all your thoughts and greetings, but we are asking for no flowers." This case sparked an increase in community concerns for more surveillance cameras in the city center. Additionally, a group of dedicated volunteers came together to establish the Safe House Initiative, which aims to ensure the safety of all young people traveling home. Isla Belle Reynolds was born April 4, 2010 to Trista Reynolds and Justin DiPietro. On the night of December 16, 2011, Isla was with her father at his home at 29 Violet Avenue in Waterville, Maine. He lived with his mother, his sister, and his sister's infant daughter. But that night, Justin's mother wasn't home and his girlfriend Courtney Roberts and her son were staying over. Justin would put 20-month-old Isla to bed at 8 p.m. This was the last time she was ever seen again. The night she went missing, there were 3 adults in the small home: Justin, his sister, and his girlfriend. Justin called the police at 8:50 the next morning to report her missing. Investigators found Isla's blood in multiple places in the DiPietro's home, including her first-floor bedroom and his basement bedroom, which is where he slept that night with his girlfriend and her child. His sister and his sister's child slept on the first floor. In late fall 2011, Isla's mother Trista decided voluntarily to enter treatment for substance abuse. Before entering the rehab program, Trista arranged for her sister to take care of Isla with the help of Trista's mother. But Justin's family contacted DHS and claimed that Isla was supposed to be in his care, though there was never a formal custody arrangement. Without a home visit, Isla was removed from her aunt and grandmother's care and instead placed in Justin's home that he shared with his mother and sister. A home visit would have been standard procedure, but this crucial step was skipped according to Trista and her family. The representative from DHS who placed Isla in the DiPietro home was a woman named Karen who was related to Justin's mother Phoebe. Trista had reasons for keeping Isla out of the DiPietro house. She felt that Isla wasn't safe there. Although the pair had been voluntarily co-parenting Isla, she started coming home to Trista with unexplained bruises. When Trista asked what happened, Justin said there was an incident in the ball pit at Chuck E. Cheese, but Trista knew Chuck E. Cheese didn't have a ball pit. One time, Isla's arm was broken while in Justin's care. He claimed she sustained the injury when he was carrying her into the house, and his arm slipped, causing him to fall on top of her. Justin never sought medical treatment for Isla's injury, and later she had to be placed in a soft cast to heal. Knowing her daughter was in Justin's home, Trista checked herself out of the treatment program and tried to get Isla back, but the DiPietro family refused. When she called to speak to Isla on the phone, Justin and his family made excuses as to why she was unavailable at the moment. Trista stated that she received text messages from him stating that she would never get Isla back. Trista filed for full custody of Isla on December 15th, and Justin called to report her missing the morning of December 17th. In April 2012, police found some unspecified items of interest behind the Hathaway Creative Center in the Kennebec River, about a mile from the DiPietro's home. In May 2012, nearly 6 months after Isla vanished, authorities publicly stated they believed she was dead, but did not believe she had been abducted. Investigators found several drops of Isla's blood on her car seat strap in Justin's vehicle, and her dried vomit was found on the back seat. Drops of her blood were also found on her slippers, the sofa, her baby doll, a fan cord, a plastic tote in the basement, and also on a sheet found inside the tote. On Justin's sneakers, his mattress and sheets, the cement floor and wall beside his bed, and a pallet in the basement. When investigators showed him the blood, he had no reaction. He also told Trista that it was no big deal. He said he had no idea what happened that night, and she must have been abducted, and stated it was just a normal night. Strangely, he also took out a life insurance policy on Isla weeks before she disappeared. In December 2018, 7 years after her disappearance, Trista filed a wrongful death suit against Justin. Although the suit seeks unspecified monetary damages, she stated the real goal of it was to get answers as to what happened to Isla and to recover her body. In his response to Trista's filing, Justin said he was innocent of any wrongdoing in Isla's disappearance, and the blood in his house was from one time when she was sick. Authorities maintain that he has not been cooperative with the investigation, and they believe the adults who were in the home that night are withholding information. Surprisingly, no one has been named as a suspect in Isla's disappearance, and she remains missing and her case remains unsolved. Thanks for diving into another mystery with us. If you enjoyed unraveling the clues and chasing the truth, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and give us a thumbs up. Your support helps us bring you more thrilling cases and deep dives into the unknown.